For the World of Warships fans in the audience, the 10-year anniversary event is currently going on. And it was because of this, while going over the American Battleship line, when I noticed a few interesting things. I'm sure most of you are aware of the 16-inch 50 caliber Mark VII guns used on the Iowa class, and are also familiar with the preceding Mark VI 16-inch 45 caliber guns used on the North Carolinas and the South Dakotas. But where did these weapons come from? And why did the US Navy stick with 16 inches for so long, even when other navies experimented with larger calibers? Today, we'll trace the history of American 16-inch naval guns from their first designs before World War I to the legendary weapons that arm the Iowa-class battleships, and a few of the other ones in between. Stay tuned. The Navy's first 16-inch gun was designed in 1913 and test-fired in 1914, just as the First World War was beginning in Europe. The first ships to carry them were the Maryland-class battleships, Maryland, Colorado, and West Virginia. Each mounted 8 of the new Mark I guns, a 16-inch 45 caliber weapon. The Mark I appeared in 10 different modifications as the Bureau of Ordnance worked out refinements in chamber design, rifling, and liners. Altogether, about 40 guns were built. To extend the life of the original Mark I guns, many were relined and then redesignated as the Mark V. For example, a Mark V Mod 0 is in reality a Mark I Mod 2 relined with a modified chamber. The Mark V served into the Second World War, and this is how Colorado is presented at Tier 7 in World of Warships. Continuing with the lineage of the Mark I gun, another round of relining produced the Mark VIII gun. The Mark VIII Mod 0 and Mod 1s were improved relines of earlier guns, with changes to chamber slope and liner taper. By April 1944, West Virginia had been rebuilt completely with Mark VIIIs and was the only ship to carry them. While the Mark VIII's chamber could accommodate the Super Heavy AP shell, the shell hoist and machinery in all the Maryland-class ships could not accommodate the 6-foot shell, and thus none of the ships would ever carry or fire the Super Heavy AP shell. By the end of World War I, the United States Navy was moving to the next and second version of the 16-inch gun. The increase in displacement of the South Dakotas and the Lexingtons meant a large, more powerful weapon could be carried. And when I mean South Dakotas, I mean the first class of South Dakotas, not the South Dakota fast battleships that would come later. The 16-inch 50 caliber Mark II was developed to fit this need for additional firepower for these ships. The Mark II was intended to equip the 6 South Dakota-class battleships, that would be BB-49 through BB-54, and the 6 Lexington-class battlecruisers, CC-1 through CC-6. The Mark II was first fired in April 1918, and thus 150 guns were then ordered. In 1921, President Harding called for a naval disarmament conference that would put an end to the ensuing naval arms race. The resulting Washington Naval Treaty required construction of 1 Maryland-class battleship, that would be USS Washington, BB-47, to stop and would cancel the Lexington-class battlecruisers and South Dakota-class battleships entirely. So of the first 16 ships designed to carry 16-inch guns, 13 were now canceled. At the time, 71 guns, including the prototype for the 16-inch 50, were complete, with another 44 guns in progress. That same year, in 1922, the Navy began to transfer the guns meant for the 2 canceled classes to the Army for use in coastal defenses. Before we move on, and for the sake of continuity, the Mark III gun was an experimental version of the Mark II gun. No real weapons were ever produced. Even as treaties limited construction, the Navy experimented with new ways of improving gun performance. The experimental 18-inch 48 caliber Mark I gun, for instance, was now illegal to possess under the treaty limitations, and thus the Navy lined the gun down to 16 inches. This relining would create the 16-inch 56 caliber Mark IV gun. It offered blistering muzzle velocity, but only lasted around 125 shots before wearing out completely. It proved to be too expensive and too impractical. By the 1930s, the Bureau of Ordnance was designing super heavy shells, first 2,400 pounds and then 2,700 pounds, when compared to the original 2,900 pounds of the original 18-inch 48 gun. These gave the existing 16-inch guns the hitting power of a much larger weapon. By 1937, the lesson was clear. Heavier shells at lower velocities offered better results than simply chasing raw muzzle velocity alone. This insight would shape all future US battleship guns. By the mid-1930s, the treaty system was collapsing. Japan was building new battleships, and the US responded with the North Carolina and the South Dakota classes, the first battleship since the 1920s and the first of the fast battleships. These ships received the new 16-inch 45 caliber lightweight Mark VI gun. The gun fired the new 2,700-pound super heavy armor-piercing shell. At 2,300 feet per second, the muzzle velocity was lower than earlier designs, but the combination gave superior penetration at longer ranges. All 6 fast battleships from North Carolina through Alabama carried these guns. The guns would receive minor modifications during the war, resulting in the final version of Mark VI Mod II. In total, around 120 Mark VI guns were produced. And finally, we come to the Iowa class, the fastest and most powerful American battleships ever built. When the Allies invoked the escalator clause, it meant battleships could now grow to 45,000 tons, 10,000 tons more than the previous 35,000-ton treaty limit. The new Iowa-class ships would need a new gun, and the Navy once more turned to the 16-inch 50 caliber. However, the old Mark II was still too heavy. Another new lightweight gun would be needed. The resulting gun was the 16-inch 50 caliber lightweight Mark VII, the ultimate refinement of the type. Like the Mark VI, it fired the 2,700-pound AP shell, but at a higher velocity of 2,500 feet per second. This extended maximum range to more than 42,000 yards, about 24 miles. Captain Edward Snyder of USS New Jersey later claimed that a shell could penetrate 32 feet of reinforced concrete. The Mark VII was planned not only for all 6 Iowas, but also for the even larger Montana class that were eventually canceled and never completed. The 16-inch 50 caliber Mark VII remained in service into the 1990s. Its perfection is marked by the fact that it remained the Mark VII Mod 0 throughout its career of nearly half a century. The Navy's 16-inch guns followed the path of steady improvement. What began as a weapon of the treaty era matured into the Mark VI and Mark VII, capable of hurling 2,700-pound shells with devastating effect. And while the Japanese Yamato class mounted larger 18.1-inch guns, the US 16-inchers, backed by better fire control, heavier shells, and a smarter design, were every bit as lethal. In World of Warships, these differences show up in the stats: shell velocity, range, armor penetration, but behind the numbers lies a fascinating story of naval engineering, an evolutionary journey from the Maryland class through to the Iowa class, and the gun that became the true heavy hitter of the US Navy.